All right, go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you, Stacy. Welcome to the June 8th meeting of the Issaquah Environmental Board. I'm Jamie Finch, and I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. The state of Washington and the city of Issaquah continue to have a declared emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Under Chapter 115, Laws of 2022, ESHB 1329, the city of Issaquah has determined that an in-person meeting cannot be held with reasonable safety. Due to these factors, this meeting is being held remotely. Due to the virtual format of tonight's meeting, I'd like to start by providing some guidelines. We have participants attending by computers and others who may be attending by phone. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If having technical difficulty, try joining the meeting using a different device, or use the call-in information in the meeting invite to call into the meeting. Commissioners, please, and we have a couple updates here. So I know we've gone through this a lot, but maybe don't let your eyes glaze over for this part, as we do have some things that Stacy had noted, but did want to call out, as we do have a couple updates. To indicate a desire to speak, send a chat to all panelists and type question or comment, then wait to be acknowledged by the chair. In response to some feedback we received from some board members, we are opening up the option to provide a comment in chat. We will need to read that out loud to get it on the record, but if you're not comfortable providing a comment for whatever reason verbally, you can now feel free to include that in the chat. We will then read that to get it on the record. I would still encourage anyone that's comfortable to continue using the format that we have been using, especially because at the point that we go in person, we'll need to go to that route anyways. But we did want to provide some flexibility just in case some weren't as comfortable in this virtual format speaking. So I think one of the other items that Stacy also mentioned in her email earlier this or last week was as part of an effort to help make sure that we're summarizing comments and helping Stacy as well as the rest of the city just make sure that we're capturing our feedback. We're going to be summarizing what we feel we're hearing as agreement upon discussions that we're having, as well as any dissent that there might be from that opinion. So that's going to be a part of the process that we're going to be testing out tonight. So if you're wondering why we're doing that, that's the reason. But also if there's any feedback on what we're summarizing or just in general in that process, I'm definitely open to it. And then I think with that, Stacy, if you're ready, we could go through attendance.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Tom Anderson.
Here.
Mathangi Ramanathan. Okay, let's test your mic again. Sorry, I forgot to do that when you joined.
Yes.
Okay. Great, thank you. Nancy Davidson has an excused absence. Jamie Finch.
Sure.
Cameron Fisher has an excused absence. Rishi Hazra, I believe Rishi is on the phone. We have a call-in user that begins with 837, I believe. I'm going to unmute you. I believe this is Rishi.
Yes, hello. Hello, this is Rishi.
Great, thanks, Rishi. Great, I will check in with you regularly if you're not able to join via your computer. Okay, Dan Hintz.
Here.
Laura Labego. Ashwin Manoharan has an excused absence. Don McWilliams.
Here.
Ann Newcomb.
Here.
And Janet Wall. Janet, I will try unmuting you again, see if you're able to speak. All right, you're unmuted. Great, thank you, Janet. All right, Jamie, we do have a quorum tonight.
Thank you, Stacy. Next agenda item for us is approval of the minutes. I believe these were the revised versions of those from that had previously been presented and then had been asked to get updated. Are there any comments on either of those minutes? Hearing none, those are passed by unanimous consent. Next up, we have public comment. Before I go into some guidelines, Stacy, do we have anyone attending? We do, okay.
No, sorry, Jamie, no, we do not.
Oh, we don't.
She is the only one on the phone, and I also did not receive any written comment.
Okay, well then maybe I will save us from going through that part of my script. I believe with that, it takes us to our first agenda item, which I don't know if Stacy or Tish is gonna take it from here, but whichever one it is, take it away.
Great,
Thank you,
thanks, Jamie.
Chair.
I'll go ahead and hand it right over to Tisha. Go ahead, Tisha.
Perfect. So hi everybody, I'm Tisha Gieser, City Clerk, and I think I've met all of you before. We have some veteran board members here. I see Mathangi. It's nice to meet you. Welcome to the board. So tonight I'm going to provide a training that we provide to all new board and commission members, but then we also like to just provide this brief training to all board members annually as a refresher. Because the majority of you are tenured, I'm going to try and move through this quickly. I see you have a number of other agenda items tonight. Let me take a minute to share my screen here. Okay. I continue to have this problem recently where it's wanting to share my notes screen. So let me try one more time, and then if not, we'll just go forward and you'll just get a preview. Okay.
Tisha, I'm happy to bring up the presentation as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been sharing my screen, for a couple years now via WebEx, but I had this problem last week, and it seems to be consistently happen. Oh, there we go. Okay, thanks for your patience, everybody. And I wanted to start by just saying thank you. So I staff the city council meetings, and last night was at one of the new standing committees of the city council, and I've just been hearing from the council members a lot of really positive feedback about the feedback being provided by the environmental board. And I know, you're a new board, and you've really hit the ground running and are providing input on, a lot of topics. So the TIP, last night they were talking about the Title 18 update, and I just wanted to share with you that your input is being verbalized, discussed, appreciated at these city council meetings, and just wanted to thank you, for volunteering your time to make our city a better place. It's a big commitment. So thank you. And with that, I'm just going to quickly move through this training. If there are any questions, please feel free to, indicate in the chat, and Jamie or Stacy, I'll look for you to interrupt me if a question comes through. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about Washington State's, oh goodness, one of my faithful slides also got missed tonight. But I'm going to touch on the Washington State's two sunshine laws, we call them, because they shine light on local and state government. And so they're intended to ensure public access to information and decision making. And they impact you because you're volunteering on one of the city's advisory boards. So as I mentioned earlier, I know you've all been through this training with the exception of Mathangi, but we like to provide annually just as a reminder, so there's just not an inadvertent violation of one of these two laws. So we want to increase your knowledge, reduce risk for all of us. So the two laws that I'll speak to are the Public Records Act and the Open Public Meetings Act. So the first one I'm going to talk to you about is the Public Records Act. And the Public Records Act establishes a lot of requirements for government agencies It tells us that we have to keep our records organized from damage and destruction. We have to provide our records to anyone in the world who asks for them. We don't just, we don't get to discriminate or even ask who's asking for them. This law has a little relevance to your role on the board because you might produce some records as you're serving on the environmental board. So by and large, all your materials are coming to you through Stacy, through the city. So those materials, we're keeping track of. You do not need to worry about. Some records you may have that we may not have might be things like notes that you're taking as you prepare for a meeting. If you take notes, keep them organized. You can get rid of notes. We call them transitory records. They don't have long-term value to the amid our records rules. So what I'd encourage you to do is if you're keeping notes and supporting documents, just dispose of those routinely. Once you're done with them and they've served their purpose. If we got a public records request for notes from our environmental board members, we would be reaching out to you and we would ask you if you had anything, and if you did, we would provide it to the person who'd requested it. This goes along with email as well. We really encourage you to email, to copy Stacy or other city staff when you're emailing. That's going to come into play a little later when we talk about the Open Public Meetings Act, but it also ensures the emails getting captured in one of our city systems. But you may be emailing directly with a member of the public or directly with each other in a limited capacity. And if so, we could ask you for those communications. And so it's helpful if you keep your emails organized that are related to your role on the board. In some of our boards and commissions, individuals will choose to just open a separate email account just to really make sure that they're keeping all their board correspondence in one place, and that's certainly something you're welcome to do. But mostly we want you to stay organized with what you have and be prepared to let us know if we ask what kind of records you might have, because you do have an obligation to search. So that is really all I'm going to talk about on the Public Records Act, and we're going to move now into the Open Public Meetings Act. And so the Open Public Meetings Act is really about that access to government, access to decision making. It means that when a quorum, which we'll talk about in a minute, of the environmental board is together, the public should be invited to be there and listen to you talk and work through these issues. So it means that your meeting space needs to be open. So we've published, the meeting link to tonight's meeting. We've published the call-in information so anyone can join at any time. And when you move to in-person meetings next month, that door will be open. It also means we provide advance notice of all your meetings. And this is something that, city staff that we handle. We ensure your agendas are posted on the website in advance so people know what to expect. Really quickly, I think I know your board has had a number of special meetings. So you've got your kind of regular monthly meetings, and at those meetings, you've got a lot of flexibility. You have a published agenda, but technically, if a majority of you agreed, you could bring up an issue not on your agenda. That's probably not very likely to happen, but it's a possibility at your regular monthly meeting. When you have a special meeting that's at a different day of the month, time, or at a different location, then there's special rules around your agenda items. The rule in state law is that if you have one of those special meetings, you're limited to talking and taking action on items on that agenda. So Stacy and the clerk's office are really careful when we're publishing those special agendas for you to make sure they're comprehensive, and we just like you to be aware of that requirement. So your meeting location, you've been meeting virtually for quite some time. I heard Jamie cite the current state law that's requiring or allowing for our boards and commissions to meet virtually, but in July, you'll be shifting to a physical meeting location at Tibbetts Matter. And as I mentioned, from that time on, anytime you meet at a different place, different time location, that will be considered one of your special meetings. I also know you've had some joint meetings with other boards, so those are also considered special meetings. So this is, I've really covered this, just talked to you about the difference between your special and regular meetings. You're a little more limited to sticking to the agenda for those special meetings, and we do provide advance notice of your meeting times and also your agenda topics. We like to just let you know, in case you're, this ever occurs at one of your meetings, or maybe you're observing one of our other boards or the city council, that the Open Public Meetings Act does allow for closed sessions where only the board members or staff or city council, whatever group, talk privately, but it's for really specific purposes relating to litigation or collective bargaining. So it's unlikely to occur, but it can. And if so, we have some certain requirements to facilitate those closed sessions. So this is one of my last slides here, and this is just a reminder about what your quorum is as the environmental board. So the quorum is the number of members you need to have present to convene your meeting and to really do anything. You need five members, half of your board plus one. And you, outside of your published environmental board meetings, we really work to encourage you to avoid meeting a group of five of you or more. This doesn't apply to purely social gatherings. If you want to, get together to celebrate something and have just like a purely social gathering in a local restaurant or someone's backyard, that is totally fine. But we are careful with events, for example, that you might want to participate in that are related to, one of the topics that might come before the environmental board that multiple of you might want to attend. We really strongly encourage that you empower 3 or even 4 members to attend and then bring back information to the full group, because technically if there are 5 of you together, it could be and technically is considered a meeting, and so that requires that publishing of an agenda, ensuring the meeting space is open, and we really try and avoid that unless we're having a dedicated environmental board meeting. So I mentioned that as a scenario because I know it has come up in the time the environmental board is together. There's lots of great regional events that I know multiple of you may have interest in, and just wanted to explain some of the rationale behind encouraging just a few to attend rather than the full board. And then the other thing I want to touch on are just these inadvertent violations of open public meetings. And so the first one I just talked about, it's when you're sort of accidentally, maybe unintentionally, 5 of you end up at an event. If that happens, we just encourage you to not gather together, and maybe one of you even consider leaving if you don't mind. The other time that this can come into play kind of inadvertently is something we call a string meeting. And this happens when there's like collective accumulation of 5 board members' input that's being kind of furthered. So this can be like a conversation one of you has with another 1 or 2 board members, and then one of the 3, maybe let's say 3 board members, then goes and talks to another board member and shares all that input on that topic with now a 4th board member. And that 4th board member is just buzzing, with interest in this. And so they go and reach out to a 5th board member and share all that input. You've now kind of got some sort of deliberating happening outside of an open public meeting. So we just encourage you to be mindful of that number 5. We want you to be mindful about emailing, because that's a really easy place for that to happen. So if you want to share a perspective or information with the board, please work with Stacy. She can help steward that forward. That's everything I wanted to cover here. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to let me know. There are some penalties for violations of the Open Public Meetings Act. So there's individual penalties for the person who made the violation, which is why we want to make sure all our board and commission and council members are aware. And it can implicate the action taken by the board. So I For Mathingi, I would encourage you to please fill out our conflict of interest acknowledgement. I think the rest of you have likely, when you joined the board, were pointed to our conflict of interest acknowledgement. It just explains some things to be aware of as part of your service on the board. And then I lastly just wanted to touch for a minute on your transition to in-person meetings next month. So we've had a lot of facility changes at the city since going into COVID. We've decided to transition out of one of our large city buildings that housed our permitting center, and also had one of our frequently used board and commission meeting rooms. So we're using some other city spaces as we bring back our boards and commissions to in-person meetings. And for the environmental board, that will be Tibbetts Manor. So it's off of State Route 900. I'm guessing most of you are familiar with the location. It was used as a rental facility for weddings and events prior to COVID. It now is set up as a hybrid meeting place. We are expecting the expectation from the mayor and the city's leadership is that our board and commission members would be attending in person, but there will be a virtual element for the public to utilize if they want to tune into your meetings via WebEx or make comments from home. It's also possible that some of your presenters may present virtually. I know this means that you likely will need excused absences because, with the nice thing about attending meetings from home is, if you're, feeling a little unwell or you're maybe even in a different location, you can still attend. Going forward, that will be different. So please just remember to let Stacy know if you have planned travel. Really, 5 days in advance is really helpful. Really, the more notice you can provide, the better. So we need that quorum to get your meetings going. And certainly if you have a last minute situation that comes up, like an illness or unexpected emergency, just provide any amount of advance notice you can so that you can have that excused absence. We also do have a stipend policy for folks who meet certain income. There is some income eligibility that comes with this program, but it does provide a stipend per meeting to use towards transportation or childcare costs. So if you have interest in utilizing that stipend, please reach out to Stacy. She can direct you to the application for that. I think that's all I have to cover here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Again, thank you so much for having me tonight, and let me know if you have any questions.
Hi, Tisha, this is Jamie. I had a couple questions. One, if you could just maybe share a little guidance on how to and how not to interact with public comments, both before and during the meeting, that would be great.
Sure. So is this just about the best way to facilitate them? Are there any things that have come up specifically, or just want a general comment?
Yeah, the question is fairly general, but I think it's just thinking through, for example, should we be responding to that's a situation that has come up, like what is the right way to engage or not to engage with those comments? And it could be very general, but that was one of the things that had prompted this.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. So your meetings need to be open. There's actually not a requirement that public input be taken, but obviously you're interested to know. We want to know what the community thinks about these issues. So all of the boards and commissions have that public comment opportunity for the most part at the beginning of their agendas. So we read through. I'll talk to you about what that looks like at the city council, which is, and I think it's appropriate. So these are your working meetings. This is the one time a month that we have you to provide valuable input on, a litany. Your board in particular is very busy, a litany of topics that have timeframes associated with them. And so the goal is that's one of the main goals of the meeting. Public comment needs to happen, but the guidelines that we've typically taken with public comment at counselor board and commission meetings is it's not a dialogue. So it's your opportunity to hear from the public, their opportunity to share with you within that time constraint. We do encourage you to be as even with that 5 minutes as possible, as consistent as possible. But it isn't intended to be a conversation. Now, the board could have a different kind of meeting if you wanted more dialogue. You wanted to have like a more informal meeting where that was an aspect of it, more conversational. But I would say for your standard public comment, engaging back, you could ask for or offer that a follow-up would be provided. That staff could help provide a follow-up, or a board member could hear, say someone from the public poses some questions and you as a board member like, oh, those are good questions. You pose the questions. You can be a steward of that question. But I would say that typically it's they have that amount of time. They can speak pretty much on whatever they want, as long as it's not what am I trying to say? Pretty much on anything they want. They can't like try and sabotage your meeting and make loud inappropriate sounds and things like that. But by and large, they can talk about whatever they want in that time. Yeah.
Great. That's super helpful. We have I have one more question, but I'll jump to Anne, who has a question for you.
Thank you. And hey, Tisha, good to see you. This is Ann Newcomb. I'm curious to know, what are the guidelines around signing petitions that have to do with subjects that we have covered?
Okay, that's a good question, Anne. I'll offer some thoughts on that, and then that might be something that I might also respond after the meeting if I would like to sit on that for a little bit. I think as an individual, you're not restricted by being on the environmental board in forwarding your viewpoints. So the only thing to be mindful of is just that you're sure, like you wouldn't sign the petition Ann Newcomb, member of the environmental board, or if you were a chair or vice chair, you wouldn't put that next to your name. And I think just being clear too when you're talking to people, that you are clear whether you're representing yourself or representing a adopted recommendation from the environmental board, and those are two different things. So, when people make public comment at the meetings, some people will say, I'm representing this entity. They've got either because of their position or because there's an adopted position. But so you would just want to be mindful of doing that. I don't see an issue with you signing a petition as an individual, though.
Are you need anything else on that, Anne, or you good? Okay. Don, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, Tisha, building off of Jamie's question a little bit, you referenced public comments. What about the emails we receive? We get a lot of comment by email ahead of the meetings. Are we allowed to respond to those emails, or do we just table them and bring them back to the meeting?
Yeah, emails can be, I think, handled in lots of different ways. So, something that the city council has done, but I think it can be really challenging. But they made a decision during COVID that the council president does attempt to summarize email that's come in related to agenda items on that night's agenda. But that's challenging because that means you need to be able to monitor your emails. Sometimes emails come in right before a meeting, and then summarizing comments can be hard too sometimes if someone is writing you paragraphs. I think that having just I think a response is probably important, at least at a minimum, an acknowledgement, and whether that's coming from staff on behalf of the board or whether that's something that that could be something you talk about as a board. Is there interest in having the chair or another member respond on behalf of the board? Nothing's precluding you from responding individually as a board member. But it's important to think kind of back to that conversation with Anne. When you're providing your response, you're wearing your environmental board hat in that response. So you would need to be, again, if it's something the environmental board had already weighed in on, and you could convey that to the person. Otherwise, it wouldn't be harmful to share your personal viewpoint, but you would just need to be clear that the environmental board hadn't taken a formal position on that topic, but thank you for their input. And I think if there's, if there's gray area there, you're unsure how to respond, it's helpful to have staff, let us help you. Let Stacy help you. So that's all I have to say on that topic. It's not a bad topic for the board to talk about. How if you'd like a more uniform, more of a process around that.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thanks, Tisha. I just have one more question, and it relates to the fact that we've never actually met in person. And so my question relates to when, as part of taking an action, like we have typically written down any motions. And so I'm curious what that process looks like, not in a virtual format. Could you just walk us through what that might look like?
Yeah, so I can tell you the city council moved back to in-person meetings in March, and the motion's actually been one of the bigger adjustments for me. The chat was such a nice tool for someone who had a thought that, and wanted to get it in writing, and we can quickly get it in front of everyone. That just isn't as possible as quickly with an in-person meeting. So that might mean someone writing something out. I know I've talked to Stacy. I know the board is wanting to make an effort to try and kind of settle on the recommendation and the wording of the input in advance. And so that can mean, sharing a screen, sharing Word, and typing out the motion. So that's a possibility. I think that all takes a little more time. So you can always take an at ease in your meeting, which is like no one gets up and runs away, but there's just a pause, and you go off air. The recording would get paused, and you could give someone a few minutes to write out a motion and get their wording correct, and then reconvene. So those are my two thoughts. Screen sharing, just taking a minute to get things written down, and some meeting prep can be helpful too, to have some potential wording ready as much as possible.
Thanks, that's really helpful. I think we'll definitely want to, when we actually have action to be taken, want to do a little refresher and make sure we have that process defined. I'm not seeing any other questions from the board. So I think, thank you, Tisha, for joining us. And I'm sure if there's any other questions that the board has after this, that they can feel free to reach out to you, but really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, I think next up agenda item is ICAP performance dashboard.
Great. Good evening, members of the Environmental Board. My name is Dale Markey Crimp. I'm one of the management analysts here at the city, and specifically the work that I do most frequently centers in our performance measurement and data analytics work. As I mentioned in the memo that you received in your packet ahead of tonight's meeting, the real purpose of our time together tonight is to solicit some perspectives and some feedback from this board on the development of a performance and tracking dashboard for the Climate Action Plan. This is something that Stacy and I have been in conversation about over the last couple of months, but we think it's time to bring this potential tool and what it could look like to this particular group of people. You represent the stakeholders that we think will use this tool the most, alongside staff members, to ensure that we're making the progress against these ambitious goals that we have. As the memo outlined, we're in a little bit of creation phase. I won't use this word. I won't like pull up a human-centered design map and show you where we are, but we're kind of a little bit in ideation still. And so part of what I'll show you tonight and what was included in the packet are some examples of the current dashboards that exist within our city's emergent dashboarding initiative. And then the two questions that we really will spend hopefully the most of our discussion time on this evening are as follows. What's the overall structure that you think would be the most intuitive and informative for sharing ongoing progress towards the goals outlined in the ICAP? And what information would you most like to see featured in the dashboard? So what I'm planning to do is I'm going to share my screen in a moment and show you a few of the dashboards that already exist that I linked within the memo. And then we'll look at the mock-ups that also were linked at the very end. And so I'll kind of walk through those, and we'll potentially save questions to the end. And it'll be pretty easy, I think, to move back and forth. If you're like, oh, wait, could you go back to that dashboard and show me this feature again? Before I jump in, though, are there any initial questions, thoughts, things that folks want to make sure to get out there on the table before we jump in? Okay. Let's see. Okay, can you currently see, can I just get a thumbs up if you can see my Chrome browser that's showing the citywide homeless dashboard? Thumbs down. Oh, no.
A gray gridded screen.
Oh, that's not good. Okay, 1 second. Let me move this over here. It's never what you want to hear when you go to share something. You never want the thumbs down. Oh, I see. We've got a whole bunch of things on here.
Yeah, you're good. Just the boxes are in front, I think. That's looking good now.
Is that looking good now? Can you see, hopefully, this dashboard? Great. I've moved you over to my other screen. Excellent. So I'm just going to walk very briefly through the sort of public-facing side of each of these dashboards. Right now, the city is mainly using one tool for its data analytics, which is Microsoft Power BI. We're also currently exploring using some tools connected to ArcGIS. So while ArcGIS is known probably amongst the folks on this call too, this is often known as a sort of geographical tool, it also has been expanded over the last few years to really provide more data analytics opportunities. But the main dashboarding tool we're using right now is Power BI, and we're largely using that because a lot of our data analytics work is sort of in its nascent stage. We're just gathering the data, just putting together the dashboards. And so I think that there's an opportunity to evolve these over time. And of course, all our work is iterative. But what you'll see are mostly our three dashboards that already exist within Power BI. This is the first dashboard that we've launched in the city, which is our citywide homeless outreach dashboard. What you can see right here is the way that this works is it has some brief directions here, but it has sort of 5 key performance indicators that the team itself has decided are the real indicators of their work. People served, interactions to date, service connections, individuals who've been temporarily sheltered, and then individuals who have been permanently housed and maintain that permanent housing. The way that you would navigate through something like this is to click on one of these key indicators. It even tells you here, and it will bring you to a little bit more information, a little bit more of a visualization of that data with a little bit of an explanation here at the top. You can also navigate within. You can see I'm going to use this home button to go back and click on another indicator and bring us to permanent housing. And so you can see another example of a different type of visualization for how we might show this data over time, as well as if you wanted to sort of drill up the data, so just have it grouped by year, or drill down the data to see it broken out this way. So this is just, I think, a good example of one of our first dashboards, a pretty simple dashboard. It does a pretty good job communicating in a rather simple way the work that's being done and the progress that's being made on this particular program at the city. Next, I'll just show you a similar but different dashboard, which is our community court dashboard. The city of Issaquah launched a community court in August of this past year. So it's coming up on its 1-year anniversary in just a couple of months. And you can see the style here is pretty similar. And I'm going to just zoom out a little bit. So we've got a little bit more on the screen here. But you can see similarly, they've chosen some KPIs, key performance indicators, and they've got one visual that they wanted to make sure was on the front page. Similarly, they've got theirs set up so that if you wanted to click on any one of these, it's going to take a second, but it'll bring you to a page that'll tell you a little bit more about, in this case, the resource room, which is a component of our community court program. And they've made some decisions about having both a visual and a scroll sort of chart here, as well as some additional information down here and a pretty good amount of information in writing on here. There are lots of opinions about how much text you want on the page, but this is the decision they've made, and that currently we're sticking to it. Similarly, you've got a back button, a home button that allows you to move around internally, with also the option at the bottom to click backwards and forwards here. And so both of these are live published dashboards. You could Google them, or I guess search for them if you wanted to be agnostic about your search engine. Search for them on the internet and end up here able to look at these two public-facing dashboards. Got one more, and then I'll pause for some questions before we look at the potential ICAP dashboards. So the last one, you're getting a little bit of a sneak peek, though I will admit it's already in the public record and it's already been in front of council. But you're getting before fully launched sneak peek at our citywide performance dashboard. In 2020, the city council adopted a number of performance measures intended to sort of measure over time the health of the city, the vitality of the city, and have that be aligned with the 6 strategic goal areas. And so you can see here, you've got our 6 strategic goal areas. And the way that you move through this, again, similar but different, would be, and I'll show you in a minute, to click on one of these. We thought a lot about what additional data you might want to have on the front page of this dashboard. And so one thing we've got on here is just how we're doing and how we've been doing against our 55 measures, which are, some of them have multiple measurement points within them, which is why these numbers here are going to add up to more than 55. But to show us, are we approaching our target? Are we meeting our target, yes or no? Or is our target still to be determined? And so you can see over time with a quick glance here that we've had actually a pretty big increase in the last year or two in the number of targets we're not meeting. But goodness, have we really determined what our targets have been. So that number of targets to be determined has been decreased over time. And then to move around this, similarly, you could say you're really interested. I'm going to say that this group is probably really interested in the environmental stewardship performance measures. You'll be brought to this environmental stewardship landing page, where from here you can similarly, again, click on one of these performance measures. Let's click on one that we're not going to see again today. So let's go ahead and I'll click on this acres of invasive plants removed and replanted. Before I click on that, you'll notice, again, we've got our targets here. So you can see that for the reporting year 2021, we met 5 targets within environmental stewardship. We missed 4, and there's still 1 target that's yet to be determined. And if I wanted to say, look at, but how did we do in 2018? I could click there, and then it would tell me again, 3, 4, and 3 in this case. So let's go back to 2021. And let me give a little click on this invasives. And so this is bringing us to a landing page specifically about this one measure. In this case, volunteer participation in Green Issaquah, and how many acres of invasive plants they've removed and replanted. And so you can see here, we can look and say, oh, gosh, there's some interesting information here about both the number of volunteers and the number of hours. Normally, you'd think that we might see some correlation between the two. It's actually not really playing out that way here, which is interesting. And then you can also see over here that total, we've removed this many. What you'll notice is we only have data for 2 years on acres removed and replanted since Green Issaquah was only adopted in 2019. And they make up a very tiny little bit here on this visual. But again, you'd be able to slice it by year. So say we just wanted to take a good look at 2017, we could take a closer look at 2017 here. Similarly, you could sort of do that. You could do that sort of slicing itself by just, you're like, ooh, what about 2020? How many? Oh, we removed 16 acres in 2020. So that's a little bit of a tour of our pre-existing dashboards. And that kind of, I'll pause here to see if there are just any questions generally about the dashboarding effort and initiative, any of these three dashboards, before we turn to a conversation about the potential mock-ups of the ICAP dashboard.
Thank you, Dale. I had one question for you, and I think it's particularly relevant for ICAP. The process of getting that blue bar to be narrower over time. Can you share a little bit about what that looked like? Because I do feel like a lot of what we're going to need to do, a lot of the ICAP goals are not easily measurable or don't have really specific targets. So I'm curious how the rubber meets the road on like getting those to not just be the homeless touch points, I think were good, but like I don't know what good is there. And I think so the goal setting part of it is what I'm interested in. So if there's anything quick to share there, that would be, and we can always table this for later, but that's something that I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that question is a great one, Jamie, because I think that the real challenge we're running into is as we look around at certain parts of the work we're trying to measure, we've got a lot that are still TBD, largely because they were goals that we adopt, or they were measures that we adopted in kind of a vacuum of being able to find cities of a similar size with similar resources, with similar needs that are also tracking this. And so a lot of it is right now, Issaquah, for the size that it is, we're one of the only cities that's endeavoring to do this kind of performance measurement at the size we're in. I think where potentially with ICAP, we have a slightly different pathway is through the participation in the Lead for Cities program. I think clearly Stacy will be able to talk more about that, but I think that there's a richness in data gathering and performance measuring that we'll be able to tap into when we think about setting our own goals and tracking towards those over time. So I think that we do have some resources in the ecosystem that we can use so that we are more quickly able to move from, say, this big sort of thick 49 over here in 2014 down to 10 and now 15 over here in 2021. But a lot of it is looking at other jurisdictions that are of a similar size, similar resources, sometimes hopefully similar region. But even if we can find partner cities that are about the same size and have similar demographics, we've been using that to sort of pick some markers. And then I think also is just historical data. We'll look at the ICAP dash in a second and we'll see sometimes that historical data is helpful. It helps us know, with a lot of this benchmarking, we think about honestly like 5 to 7 to sometimes even 10 years to really know what's our baseline. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that especially the last 2 years have not been a typical baseline year. So a lot of the measures, when you see this performance dashboard go live in a couple of weeks, you'll notice that 2020 and 2021 look very irregular compared to the historical data. And so really, if we're able to gather some of that historical data, and we do for some of our measures have historical data from the last 5 or 6 years, that'll also be helpful in giving us an idea of, okay, if this is where we're starting, what's the ambitious yet feasible goal moving forward?
That's helpful. I mean, I think overall, I really enjoy, I think what you guys have done with this is a great way to look at it. First, are we defining goals? And then how are we doing against the ones that we've defined? So, appreciate the additional context. I'm not seeing any other questions on this topic. So I think you might be good to move to the mock-up.
Great. Thank you. Well, let's dive into this. So I'll talk just very briefly. And again, this is maybe not the level of beauty that we will ultimately get to, but wanted to put some ideas out there to just see some of the different things we might be putting down on an interactive dashboard. And so one thing to notice, there are a couple of different examples here, but I'll sort of walk you through a general idea. A general idea being something where we've got a landing page that people can come to that has some sort of important information, potentially our overall goals up here, with the ability to then say, click on some of our goal areas within ICAP, but at the same time to also see what progress are we making. So specifically in terms of when we think about the actions outlined in the plan, what's their status? How many of them have we launched? How many of them are planned but not yet launched? How many of them have we not even started? And how many are in progress? Now, before you say, oh my gosh, data, this is new to me. This is all fake data. I made this up. So yeah, don't rush to wondering where this information came from. This is, yeah, we have not launched. I do not think we're not in the process of launching 36.36% of our actions as outlined in the plan, nor have we, are we at 28% over here. But there would be potentially an option to have some sort of indicator of where we are in the planning, launching, progress of the actions that are outlined in the plan and the actions that the team is outlining as we speak. But having some sort of landing page, which then people can click on. So say there was one that I made live for everyone. If you click on buildings and energy, bringing us to a buildings and energy page. So bringing us to a landing page that says, hey, here's where we are. Here's what's happened in terms of our indicators within this large goal area. And here are the actions, sort of the IDs that as outlined in the plan, what that means, the actions that we've taken or not taking, the related actions, and what the current status is, as well as the progress towards finishing that action. So having this here so that people can actually scroll through and be like, okay, climate community challenge, that's the thing that I care about. Where are we in that? And then from here, being able to also click on another indicator. And this happens to be when we do have real data on. So this is live, not made up data of our community-wide electricity use since 2017. And so bringing people actually to see, okay, what has our community-wide electricity use been? And you can see this is by type. So by residential, industrial, commercial, and lighting. Lighting, unsurprisingly, quite small on this graph. But seeing a general trend of where were we in 2017 when we set a goal to decrease by 25% from 2017 levels? How are we doing against that? And then with, you can see this is very similar to the performance dashboard page, but with the goal here, total use here. So this is total use since 2017. The ability to click a reporting year in general. So if I wanted to look at 2019 and just get the cumulative for 2019, and then some information here. So you can see this is giving a little explainer about, where are we in our efforts towards this particular goal, and then being able to unclick there. Similarly, I'll do one more click and then I'll pause. So similarly, being able to sort of think about, I've got one more example here. So from the materials and consumption goal area, this is again true data. This is what our data looks like for this particular goal. So you can actually see our goal is to increase the percentage diverted. Right now, we're actually on a trend away from where we want to be as a community. And so this is again showing us commercial, multifamily, and residential diversion from landfill. It's showing us this. It's highlighted in pink because it's not hitting our goal. And we can again also go ahead and by year look. And actually this is sort of programmed so that if there were a year that we were hitting our goal, it would turn green. It would turn yellow and then it would turn green over time. So people can pretty easily see both the visual and also slice that data in different ways. I'll say a couple more things. So I'm going to just move back through this mock-up a little bit. We might think differently about what we want the landing page to look like. You can see this landing page I initially showed you is pretty long. And we have the ability to change the canvas shape that way, but it's also a little busy. And we've definitely heard from the community groups we've engaged with so far, they like the simple. They really like that homeless outreach dashboard because it's so simple. So we might think about something like this, which is sort of a simplified version, doesn't have that progress tracking at the bottom. Or we might think about something that's like this, which is telling you actually how are we doing on these different goals. I think one thing we've gone back and forth as a staff on is that these numbers don't mean a whole lot just floating out here, and that might be actually a little distracting. But again, you see these colors are the same colors as in the ICAP. This is sort of like a filled in version of this. And then going back to this simpler one right here, but similarly being able to do a click through, getting to buildings and energy, clicking through all the way to here to community-wide electricity use. So, you know, I could click and ramble for a while. That's not sort of why we're here. We're here to get your input, get your perspective, get your questions. So just to remind us of the two sort of questions we're considering tonight. What do you all think about the overall structure of a dashboard or for our climate action plan that would be intuitive and informative to share ongoing progress? And what information would you like to see featured on the dashboard? So those are the two questions we're diving into tonight, and I'm happy to take any questions, but I will likely be taking a lot of notes, hopefully in the next bit of time.
Thank you, Dale. It looks like we have our first comment from Dan Hintz. Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Dale. Dan Hintz speaking. Yeah, I just first want to say, I mean, really, really great first impressions. I do agree. When I was looking at the three you shared in the memo, that the homeless outreach program definitely was the cleanest, kind of easiest to just kind of process at a high level. I do think I really like, I mean, I think ultimately there's a bottom line to this work, and it's reducing, greenhouse gas emissions. So I think having that up front, like it is centered right now, larger, on the screen relative to the 5 kind of priority areas is awesome. So I think for me, that is ultimately the bottom line, but then seeing some of these nuances and the different efforts around, transportation, buildings, all those sort of things. I would be curious, I think this is a few tiers down, obviously, from the landing page, but just how some of these things are measured. I would like to see, some, and once again, maybe not, you get so nuanced about that, and I know we've covered some of this in past conversations, but I think just a little bit of detail that you can navigate to a little bit in terms of how some of the stuff is measured, year to year or whatever the intervals are. And then the last comment I have is, something that maybe seems missing a little bit is, there's a lot of community engagement, kind of hidden or not hidden, but, integrated with these different goals. But I feel like some of the more like, even just, for example, the East Side Climate Challenge, or just, more just direct touch points for people in terms of education, outreach, involvement. So I feel like that's maybe just missing a little bit and could be something that I don't have a perfect idea of how to track or what that looks like, but just, I say I don't have much of an idea of how to track that. I should say definitely not a perfect idea. But anyway, so those are kind of my comments, first reactions.
Great. Thanks, Dan.
Yep.
Thank you, Dan. Anne, you're up next with a question.
All right. Thanks. Ann Newcomb here. Yeah, and I agree with Dan. It looks great. Good job. I'm thinking with buildings and energy, we've got the years, community-wide electricity use by year, type and year. And I'm wondering, I know our population has been growing. So if we could do it per capita somehow as well, so that we could see, hey, we really are doing better. It's just our population is growing. Of course, we have to, even though our population is growing, we still have to get our emissions down. But that's one thing. And then you probably are already planning on doing this, but just making sure that there's links and connections between this page and the ICAP web page so that people can easily navigate back and forth. I'm sure you already thought about that. That was my main comment, I think.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Those are great.
Thank you, Anne. Matangi, you're up next.
Thank you for sharing. I was very excited to see database, data-driven decisions and looking at analytics in dashboards, something that I'm passionate about as well. A couple of questions I had for you was around, I saw one markup which had a lot of verbiage in it, the other markup where it was just numbers, but you mentioned that the numbers don't carry meaning. Wondering if you had, can you explain to me as to if those are the numbers that we are measuring, why does it not matter to us?
Oh, that's a question. That's a great question. I think a lot of what I've been discovering as I've been engaging with different I've been doing a lot of user testing to get a sense of, okay, when you click through here and you see this visual or you see these numbers, what do you understand? What do you not understand? And a lot of the feedback I've been getting, especially specifically on our citywide dashboard, is that there's just there are numbers that make sense to the subject matter experts in that area, but the person in the general population might not really understand what that means. I think one thing that Stacy and I have discussed a few times is just, we're talking about it for water, but I think kilowatt hours of energy. I can tell you, as someone that pays my energy bill, I kind of understand what that is, but goodness, is it kind of a meaningless number to be like, oh, 3 billion kilowatt hours of energy? And so one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how this dashboard can be an educational tool, not just a tracking tool. So there's something that we could compare it to. I think one thing, Stacey and I have talked about this with water, and she's used the example of, how many pools, how many like Olympic-sized swimming pools is this? And so really starting to think about, for some of these measures that are meaningful, but meaningful with context, what's the context we can provide that's relatively pithy, so that people, I think they say on average 8 seconds now is about as much time as you have to grab someone's attention. So what's the pithy context we can provide that'll make that data meaningful? So I think a good example is like kilowatt hours. How can we really quickly tell someone, this is, your dishwasher running uses this many kilowatt hours of energy, so that they very quickly understand, oh gosh, we're running how many dishwashers equivalents, or is this much in the average Issaquah residents electricity bill? Something like that could also be a helpful just touch point to draw people back to a more personally felt example of how this data manifests in their life. Yeah.
Makes sense. And the comment from you is more around very much in line with what you were hinting, like a persona base, like you want to create awareness of what are the different initiatives. And the drill down could be that, I don't know if you've experimented Power BI metrics. It was released with you can actually have here are the goals, here are the targets, and this is how it's trending over time. And you can actually add comments, whether it's on track, everything in a single page, so you can actually see it. I just wanted to share that might be something you want to explore.
Amazing. Thank you. I'll definitely look further into that.
Thank you, Matangi. Next up, Tom, you have a comment.
Yes, so I just want to say I'd really like the drilling down, being able to descend down and see more information as a geek who likes to see the data. That's cool. But I just want to emphasize keeping it simple and clean at the top is really important. You just lose so many people. So just want to emphasize at the highest level, it's got to be clean and simple and easy to relate to, but then being able to drill down, I like to be able to see the details. I was a little bit worried about the one example you showed there of kilowatt hours of electricity usage. Wasn't that great? It's going down, but just cautioning that, well, with our reducing natural gas use, we might actually go up in our electricity use. So that has to be balanced. It's really the total energy use, and also while electricity, green electricity shouldn't be measured in the same way as the dirty electricity and natural gas. So anyway, there's some nuance there to what kind of energy we're using that needs to be considered in that equation as well. That's all I had. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Tom. Rishi, you're up next.
Yep. Hello, Rishi speaking. One, I wanted to say I think it looks great, and I'm glad to see that the city in such a short amount of time has been able to put this together. One thing I would say is like I think would be more beneficial if the database itself was larger and perhaps took up more of the actual page. So it'd be easier to see, and I think it would seem more like an actual a dashboard there. And also, I think I agree with Tom that making the first thing that people see much less complex. So you can click through the different sectors. You can see like the progress bar and see where we are with each of the goals. And just for a very quick visual reference, so people, whether they're interested in just researching the city, if they're from other cities, or if they're within our city and they're trying to see what our city's doing, it'll be made for a quick, easy interpretation, but then also making enabling them to go into the further details. And then that at that point, I don't think that the cleanness or like the visual appeal is as necessary, but at that point, just making sure they can get the data easily by clicking through and then having it organized basically logically, which I think it is right now.
Thank you, Rishi. I'm just going to read a couple comments that were shared. Matangi had shared a link to some more information on Power BI metrics. And then Don shared that he would echo Tom's comments of keeping it simple at a high level, but having the option to drill down where your interests lie. Great job. Tom, you had another comment?
Actually, more of a question. I'm just wondering how these this Microsoft BI tools work for automatically adapting a level of information for mobile devices versus the big screen presentation. This is an increasing problem, and more people are getting everything they look at on their little handheld device versus something big. And a lot of platforms are getting pretty good at adapting to the screen size, but that could be a major challenge. So I'm just kind of curious how the tooling you have in place deals with that particular problem.
Great question, Tom. One that you can imagine I have been thinking a lot about. What I'm finding, we did a lot of research, I think, before landing on pursuing Power BI as one of our tools. There are sort of, as I mentioned in the memo, we're also looking at ArcGIS options. Power BI, I would say, is the best of what is, so I would say it's better than Tableau and better than a few other analytics tools that I've seen in terms of being able to actually click around on it on your phone. Unfortunately, it doesn't have it has a mobile view option for people who have a Power BI license. It doesn't right now, currently. There's some optimizers that are pretty good. And so I've been able, through the same sort of user forum that the sort of information is that we just shared in the chat directs you to, I've been able to get some updates about like, oh, what's the workaround for this? It's not as great as you would hope. And so one of the reasons that we're sort of looking at also what could an ArcGIS experience dashboard look like maybe a year or two from now when we have more of the data. They've got some more options in terms of mobile sort of setup that can be seen pretty clearly, I would say, on a phone. Specifically, this is a new hot off the press dashboard. The city of Seattle has just put together a new dashboard for their homeless outreach efforts. And they've done that using an Esri ArcGIS tool, and it opens really nicely in the phone and sort of reformats automatically. So we're looking at that as like the sort of 2.0 iteration for our dashboarding efforts, where we would embed the visualizations that we're creating in Power BI into potentially an ArcGIS experience and still use that Power BI dashboard in a more regular quarterly way, but potentially use an ArcGIS experience for sort of our annual updated report that's a little bit more move through it intuitive. But absolutely, the mobile view piece is I think we're all of the data analytics tools seem to be starting to talk about that. But it's something that's definitely a little bit limiting, I would say, in general.
Thank you, Dale. I had a few comments myself. This is Jamie. One, I do think on your question of how to make this as applicable and understandable to the widest group as possible, I actually think that's where the comprehensive plan or the strategic plan version that you sent us, I actually think that that does a really good job by not actually talking about the specific metrics, but are we meeting our goal or not? To a certain extent, relying on the city, and the person has to trust that the city is setting goals that are reasonable. And of course, a subject matter expert can drill down and decide whether they think that goal is reasonable. But I think that makes it's almost kind of the ultimate kind of simplifier by saying, are we doing well or are we not doing well? And then if you're interested, here's more data on why we think we're doing well or not doing well. So I think that's one. Two things that I think might be missing or maybe just aren't in scope for this. One, I think it would be really helpful. So having our carbon reductions is helpful. Putting that in context of where we need to be and where we're at on that walk, I think is a really helpful piece of context that I just think that this, like knowing what's the goal, what are we trying to get to at the end of the day and how are we progressing towards it, again, I think is going to be helpful. And then two, I think one aspect that, again, I don't know if this is going to be a part of like a separate implementation plan or that's like, what I'm really curious is how does the public go and understand what's actively being worked on right now? And so is it a Gantt view? Is it something that helps really easily understand progress and current active actions? And I think this also relates back to the community aspect. So there's going to be certain community items that go for an extended period of time. There's others that might be for a certain time period. And so being able to help the public identify what is active and what isn't would be super helpful. And that may be not what this tool or this dashboard is intended for, but if this is kind of where everything's being presented on this, I do think that that's a potentially maybe the most important part of all of this is making sure that the community knows what status is on all of the items that might be going on, or that might prompt questions as to why we're not focusing on certain things. And so I think that view, it might not be the first view, but I think being able to understand sequencing would be super important. And I think with that, looks like Anne has a comment.
Comment / question, I guess. Thanks, and Newcomb here. So I notice the baseline is, or what we're comparing to is 2017, which might be because of the commerce goals, Washington commerce goals. But the King County Cities Climate Collaborative, or the K4C, their baseline is 2007. So I'm just wondering what the thinking is of starting with 2017. Do you know?
That's a great question, but I'm going to punt to Stacy on that.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was our last greenhouse gas inventory. So I think that's what we're looking back at. But we'll make sure with each of the metrics that we're clearly defining what that baseline is.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. And I was just going to follow up on Jamie's comment too. I think that showing which actions are underway and their progress was one of the first things I said to Dale. I really wanted to make sure this tool did. And even more important to me is which actions are not underway and are there barriers that we're facing. I think that will be an incredible communication tool for the public, but also for our council to say, we haven't been able to make any progress on this particular action. Here's why. And is there an opportunity to knock down those barriers and make progress?
Thank you, Stacy. I'm not seeing any other comments. Dale, if there's any other specific questions that you would want to ask of this group, now would be the time, or else I'll try my hand at summarizing everything we've talked about for the first time.
No, I think rather than complicating that further for you, I will just thank this group. You know, I will be back. I missed my opportunity to do an very bad Arnold Schwarzenegger impression, so you're welcome for that. But excited, really appreciate the input and excited to be back soon to show you the next iteration of this as we get ready to think about what it could look like to go live either next quarter or the quarter after. So thank you both. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dale. And now I'll please, if you feel like this is not capturing this discussion, feel free to indicate that and speak to what you think might be missed. But at least what I was hearing from the group was keeping it simple and making sure that as much of it was easy for someone to put into context, whether that be through goal setting or making the metrics, kind of putting it in people's own language, as well as helping the public understand where there was opportunity for them to engage in measures or actions that were actually involving the community directly. I think those were the overarching themes. If there's anything else that people feel I missed, please let me know. But that was what I took away. Great. Well, I don't see any pitchforks or anything, so it looks like I didn't do too bad of a job on that. So I think with that, thank you, Dale, for your time. And I think our next agenda item, Stacy will be presenting. So I appreciate your time, Dale, and Stacy, feel free to take it away.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks so much, Dale. Give me one moment here. I'm just gonna bring up some slides. All right, so the first topic I'm going to be talking about tonight is on the heat pump program for low-income residents. Jamie, are you able to see the slide? Great. Well, this item and the next agenda item were they were not items we had originally planned to talk about today. I have been giving you some briefings on them over the last couple of months, but with a pending conversation with council, we thought it would be best to bring these topics to the board in more detail and get your feedback tonight prior to presenting to council. So as you all know, buildings are the most rapidly growing source of greenhouse gas emissions in Washington state. In Issaquah, buildings and homes account for 61% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Investing in building energy efficiency is a very cost-effective way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It also seems to me that finding opportunities to work with existing buildings to support energy efficiency or greenhouse gas reductions can often be one of the more challenging areas to implement. So we are proposing to move forward with a heat pump program, which is an opportunity to work with our existing buildings. And tonight I'm going to be speaking specifically to our equity focus of that program. So the city is partnering, and some of my images aren't coming through. Hopefully those will show up later. The city is partnering with the nonprofit organization Spark Northwest, as well as the cities of Kirkland, Mercer Island, Bellevue, and Redmond to run a heat pump program. We have also been in conversations with Imagine Housing, HopeLink, and the King County Housing Authority in order to really maximize the funding that we're putting forward and to work with them to identify the residents that are most in need of energy upgrades. As residents of the Northwest face more extreme heat events and seek to electrify their homes, heat pumps are a really attractive solution. They provide both heating and cooling in a single package. They reduce our carbon emissions, they can lower utility bills, and also tend to create a more comfortable home. For 2022, our program is going to run on 2 parallel tracks. One is a market rate program that is really modeled after the Solarize program. If folks were around in, I believe that was 2017, it's a very similar program to the Solarize program. And then the other track of our heat pump program is one that will provide energy efficiency grants at really covering 100% of the cost of installation for heat pumps to residents that live at 80% or below area median income. Our market rate program for homeowners is just about to launch within the next couple of weeks. I can speak to that program more if there's interest tonight, but really did want to focus this evening on our low income component of the program. So I am planning to come to council in the next couple of weeks with a request for $125,000 to support the low income component of the heat pump program. It is an initial request for what we see as the initial year to support this program and the residents at 80% or below that area median income. We actually intend to be working more with residents that are 50% that AMI or below. Funding at the level that we're requesting to council will put us on par with other East Side cities that have committed resources to supporting low income heat pump installations. Our goal is to have this component of the program fully fund installation in about 20 units of subsidized housing or potentially for aging in place seniors. That total number that we're able to achieve is really going to depend on the unit type, the final installation costs, the additional grants that we secure, and other incentives available from PSE and the King County Housing Authority. The upgraded heating and cooling systems funded through the program, we originally had estimated to save about $500 to $1,500 per home on energy costs. There's a lot of factors that go into determining how much is saved in utility costs. It depends on what the existing heating source is and the type of system that's installed. Those numbers had come from our partner in their work in Oregon. Jamie had asked over the weekend or noted that those numbers seemed a little bit high. So I've been looking at some other studies specifically on multifamily heat pump installs, and it's likely that we'll see numbers closer in the range to probably $160 to $350 per year for a heat pump install in multifamily buildings per individual unit. And one of the other things I really did want to highlight about heat pumps is that they do provide this cooling benefit. So we're seeing this as a great opportunity to really provide resilience to communities as the summers in the Northwest become warmer. Heat pumps are also a third more energy efficient, so hence the savings, but then also that energy use reduction. The partner that we're working with in their program in Oregon, they were estimated that for about every 2 installs, that's essentially the same as taking a car off the road. So we estimate that potentially saving about 45 metric tons of CO2 per year with this initial phase of the program. I had the opportunity to meet with our equity board last week and talk to them about this program. Most of our conversation at that meeting focused on opportunities to communicate out to the community about this program. We talked about ways to work through other media outlets than the city's typical communication channels. We talked about translation of materials and also an overall equity framework that might be applied to future projects. So with you all tonight, I really was hoping to get some input on the approach that we're taking prior to coming before council. So for multifamily housing, staff from across the 5 cities have been working with Imagine Housing, and we picked that affordable housing provider because they have housing complex in each of our 5 cities. It's the only affordable housing provider that is represented across those 5 cities. In Issaquah, they have 4 housing complexes, and they have residents that are 60% or below area median income. We are also talking with Imagine Housing as well as the King County Housing Authority on how we might do more of a complete weatherization analysis and upgrade for these housing complexes prior to heat pump installation. As I've mentioned, this is really intended to be our first year of what we hope will be a multi-year opportunity, at which time we could open up funding and free installs to other low-income housing complexes. I say all that, but then wanted to note that Imagine Housing is not our only affordable housing complex in Issaquah. Again, we just initially started working with them since they were across all 5 cities. So tonight and prior to bringing this program to council, I did want to hear from you all on whether or not you have thoughts about if we should, instead of working with a single affordable housing provider, instead open up more of a grant opportunity for low-income housing to apply for free heat pump installs during this first initial year of the program. The other item I was hoping to get some feedback on tonight is, again, we've been kind of focused on the multifamily housing, just thinking that that is probably where our biggest impact would be in Issaquah, but there's an opportunity to also look at detached or single family homes, potentially with a focus on fixed income seniors first, or other residents within Issaquah. So also just wanted to get some feedback on our approach to who we're working with in the installs outside of the multifamily housing. So that was very, very quick overview, and just a couple of questions that looking for some feedback on so that we can take your thoughts in terms of our low income approach for the heat pump campaign to council. I will pause there, Jamie, for any comments, questions.
Thank you, Stacy. Does anyone have anything to share? Dawn, you have a question.
Yeah, Stacy, so you mentioned your target is more the multifamily side of the shop. Tell us a little more about the residential heat pump campaign. What would it look like if you offered, grant opportunities or something down that path?
Yeah, so right now, for non-low income residents, we are not planning to offer any kind of grant. We will be promoting PSC incentives. We're in conversations with a heat pump distributor who may offer an additional rebate on top of PSC, but there will not be, the city at this time is not planning to offer any additional incentives on top of those. I think the opportunity here for feedback is on that subsidized program. And if, in addition to looking, well, I shouldn't say in addition to, I would say staff and the administration think that probably the biggest impact we can make for low income families or residents in Issaquah is focusing on multifamily. That is where a lot of our low income are. But there are likely opportunities to also work with individuals in single detached housing, such as the fixed income seniors or low income residents that might be in single family housing, and also offer free installs there. So just trying to get a sense, this first year we don't have a lot of money, but trying just to get a sense of where we might have the biggest impact and want to focus those limited funds for the first year of this program.
Then another question, a little kind of sideways on you. Future development, is Issaquah looking at any requirements that future development would look at heat pumps as a requirement in newer construction?
Yeah, so actually the state building code, state energy code just passed requirements for, and Ann made, I know Ann tracks a lot of this, you might be able to speak to it more, but did pass requirements for new construction starting next summer. There will be heat pump requirements. That does not cover single family homes. The city's not able to get ahead of any of the single family home building codes. That's something we may talk about in the future, whether we want to have any heat pump requirements there, if allowed to under the state. But for buildings, new construction, major renovations, there are requirements for heat pumps that will start July 2023. I'm happy to share more about the passage of that code too.
Answer my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Ann, you have a question.
Yeah, thanks. This is Ann Newcomb here. So I noticed that to apply for the grant, or everybody that is going to be installing their heat pump will need to have a weatherization analyzation. Will they also have to do some retrofitting and do some weatherizing in order to put the unit in? And will the unit be replacing their old heat system?
Hmm. Are you asking specifically for the low income program?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we actually, right now, there is not a requirement for the weatherization. We just came to the realization in conversations with Imagine Housing, they haven't had the capacity to take advantage of the King County Housing Authority weatherization program. So we are just starting to have conversations of if that is a first step they might want to take and have all of that work fully paid for prior to the heat pump install. It may be possible that they're not deemed eligible or they just aren't able to go through that process where we would still look at providing the heat pump installs. So right now there is not an intent to have any kind of requirement for weatherization. I'd say on the individual household, that's a conversation that happens between the installer and the homeowner on what opportunities there might be to improve the weatherization of the home so that the heat pump can run more efficiently. Did that answer your question, Ann? Or?
Yes. Thank you. Appreciate it. Looks like a really great program, well thought out, a lot of great connections.
Thank you, Ann. Tom, you have a comment.
Yeah, Tom Anderson speaking. I guess just reflecting on this as a grant program where you're providing a thing of value to some entity that owns some properties. Most these multifamily situations are rentals, and so it's the owner of the property who's really receiving a long-term benefit and all that. I would be more comfortable with that being done to a nonprofit organization like Imagine Housing, say, than some other for-profit ownership entity. So I guess I'm favorably disposed towards that sort of organization versus some other things that one might choose to do. So, for example, maybe there's low-income people in some other housing complex that is not owned by a nonprofit. Well, they're worthy of that benefit too, but that capital expense is really becoming a windfall to the owner of the property, separate and distinct from the benefit to the person living in the unit. So it's kind of a tricky thing to balance that out. But this is a small program you're launching here with a very limited amount of money. So let's focus it in a way that we get the most leverage, and I think an outfit like Imagine Housing is a good choice. That's my feeling on that anyway. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Janet, you have a question.
I was just wondering whether the city has the baseline information, like on the number of electric cars that are presently owned by Issaquah residents, and the number of heat pumps. I have a heat pump myself, and I think it's one of the greatest things I had was to install it, because my previous heating option was not working.
Great, thanks, Jenna. That is a great question. I have not seen that information. I'll see if that's something we can track down and follow up with you, either for the heat pump or EVs, but that might be something too that we could consider in a survey in the future if we don't have that information.
Thank you, Janet. I had a couple questions and a comment. The first question, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm assuming that these units and any of these affordable housing units, is it a permanent commitment to keep them affordable housing? Can you explain that a little bit, just how that works?
Yeah, I know Imagine Housing is the service they provide. I'd have to look at what that formal commitment, long-term commitment is, but that's my understanding for Imagine Housing, as well as there are a few other housing units like that in Issaquah. So we
Okay.
can look
Yeah,
at
because that would obviously be important, because it's a
Yeah.
long-term benefit that we're looking for out
Yes.
of this. To Tom's point, a capital windfall effectively to this organization. So ensuring that it's something that is going to go to the intended purpose long-term, I think is something worth doing. One other question I had is whether there's any updates on PSE or just in general utilities being able to provide incentives for fuel type changes. I know this is something that we talked about before, and this seems very relevant for the heat pump campaign. This is probably more general, not as specific to your question, but curious if there's any update on that.
Yes, so PSE does provide a small incentive for heat pumps. There are more incentives available for the oil conversion. That's the program Seattle has been running, where they're essentially able to cover full costs for oil conversion. But as of now, there aren't additional incentives. That's something we'll continue to talk to PSE about, as well as the distributor, to see if we can get some additional funding on the table, or incentives on the table.
Great, thank you. And in my comment, I would echo a bit of what Tom said, as I do think the selection of the partner on this is really important. And I personally don't know Imagine Housing well enough to judge whether that is the right partner, but given that they get a very large benefit from this, I would just want to make sure that that is a really, I hope we don't choose that just because other cities are using them. I think we would want to make sure that we have the right partner for Issaquah. The other thing that comes to mind as well is I think what you spoke to around the climate adaptability, or the ability for people to have cooling, is something that I hadn't really thought about when I initially, but having low income residents that have access to that in addition to the savings, I think is something that really resonated for me when we were going back and forth on this. So yeah, I think I would just echo that. I think it seems like a good program. I think to a certain extent, though, the devil will be the detail on how we choose to prioritize projects. I think that is the area that I would love to see a little more definition around how we're going to be choosing those partners, and what specifically about Inspire, other than the fact that they're across all these cities. To me, that isn't sufficient. So I would love to see a more comprehensive look at why we feel they're the right partner.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, great feedback.
Any other comments or questions on this? Stacy, do you have more to present on this topic, or should I try to summarize what we've heard?
That is it on this topic. I just put up the timing. So yeah, very much appreciate that feedback. And I'll take those comments and work that into our discussion and proposal. I will be meeting with the council committee at the end of this month prior to going to full council. So the feedback's really valuable to help make a stronger case.
Great. And would you like a summary? I mean, or would that be helpful at this stage?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I think I
I'm just
captured
not clear on
it.
exactly how we're doing this, so.
Yeah, I definitely captured all the comments. If
Okay.
you want to take a shot at a higher level summary, that's great as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like there was general support for the program. I think there was some interest in learning a bit more about the how the project or how the partners are selected and how we go about ensuring that yeah, that the right sort of that this investment is basically going to the right communities and the right organizations. I think, yeah, those are the main takeaways that I could recall.
Great, thank you.
All right, and then I think with that, then we can jump to your next agenda item.
All right, thank you. I will try and power through this so that we can get out of here on time, but also don't want to rush the conversation too much. So this is the second program we'll be taking to council to request funding for. This is our Clean Buildings Initiative. So as I spoke to before, buildings, house energy use is our largest greenhouse gas emission contributor in Issaquah. And from my perspective, working with existing buildings to reduce energy use is probably going to be one of our more challenging areas to work with. And this program that we're bringing to you tonight, we see as a really great opportunity to make some headway there in reducing emissions from our existing buildings. So again, I've spoken very high level about this program to you with a few updates over the last few months, but I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper tonight and then wanted to get feedback specifically on whether this board thinks we should have any above and beyond requirements for participation in this program. So Washington State passed the Clean Building Performance Standard in 2019. This program was really passed in order to take advantage of an opportunity to work on energy efficiency for one of the state's largest greenhouse gas contributors, being existing buildings. This law includes energy efficiency requirements for what were called covered commercial buildings, only for buildings that were greater than 50,000 square feet. At the time of passage, it did not require any requirements for multifamily buildings, hotels, areas of residence. The timeline for compliance varied by the building size. That's shown in the graphic on the screen. And that's actually the reporting date. So buildings are required to be in compliance a year in advance and be reporting on that requirement, on their compliance. There are penalties imposed if a building does not report or does not meet the compliance requirements. This last legislative session, an amendment was passed to the law that does now incorporate buildings that are 20,000 square feet or greater, as well as multifamily is now included. Rulemaking is currently underway for the energy efficiency requirements for those buildings, and that's expected to be completed in December 2023. And I will note too, even if a building is in compliance, they've already met the energy efficiency standards set by this law, they still need to report regularly to the state. So along with the law, the state also authorized $75 million in incentives for what they called early adopters of the Clean Building Standard. The funds are available on a first come, first served basis. They're available for those buildings that are required to come into compliance with the Clean Building Standard, but they're also available more widely. For example, multifamily is allowed to apply for these incentives. These are statewide funds, and they can be matched with loan programs, with other incentive opportunities, such as those that PSE is offering for businesses. So the request I am planning to bring forward to council is to support implementation of a Clean Buildings Initiative. This would be a $100,000 proposal for an 18-month pilot program with the possibility to expand that in the future. This program would be both to help us meet our greenhouse gas emission targets for existing buildings, but also to take advantage of that incentive program that is available now. And this program is really modeled off of one that Bellevue started earlier this year working with McDonald Miller. The program would have the city partner with a service provider where we would essentially work with building owners and building managers to walk them through the requirements of the Clean Building Standard. We'd help also provide them access to the loans, to the incentive program, as well as complete any mandatory reporting requirements. So following broad outreach, as well as connecting with each of the buildings that are required to be in compliance, the city and the service provider would walk through the following steps shown here. The benchmarking would be done with the building. That is to show where their current energy use is. We would then compare their current energy use as well as the target that they need to meet to be in compliance. The service provider would do a scoping assessment to show the different pathways that the building can take to be in compliance. And then working with the building owner, those improvements would be made. And I'll just note, this came up in some conversations with representatives from our economic representatives from the community, that any service provider could be chosen to do the actual work on the building. A building owner would not need to work with the partner that the city has chosen for this service. Following the improvements, the service provider would then support applying for the incentive dollars. They would have already supported applying for loans if that needed to happen, and then also submitting all of the compliance reporting. So based on information we received from the Department of Commerce, as well as some further staff scrubbing, we are estimating we have about 50 to 80 buildings in Issaquah that are going to meet the threshold for reporting to the state. We think we also have an additional 70, 80 buildings that might actually be eligible for energy efficiency incentives and loans. We do need to do further analysis of that data. But I think that provides a pretty large set of buildings where we have an opportunity to work with them and reduce their energy use. We have had initial meetings with partners, including a group called Vision Partners, the Economic Vitality Commission, and there seems to be pretty broad, strong interest of the city working with the service provider to really walk Issaquah's buildings through this process and also provide easy access to incentives.
Stacy, just while you're on this, I'm just trying to place what the service provider means here, as well as just really make sure I understand what, I think based on this graph, what it's telling me, or the flow chart, what city funding supports as part of this process.
Yeah, so the service provider would be a group, like for an example, City of Bellevue has partnered with McDonald Miller. So McDonald Miller would be that service provider. They would be going out and doing these steps, and they're actually paying for that work to be done. The city funding that we'd be requesting, we'd be contributing to some of the outreach and marketing, and then we would be paying McDonald Miller, whoever our selected provider was, to actually go out and do the scoping assessment. And then again, that service provider is covering the costs of submitting the paperwork. So the opportunity to them is they're hoping, obviously, that the building owner selects them to do the improvements. That's where they'd make the money. But in the meantime, they're developing strong partnerships and clientele and working across these, the buildings in the city. Does that help clarify?
That's helpful. Yep, that's helpful. Thanks.
Great. All right, I'm just gonna, I'll walk through the benefits and then we'll move into the discussion. So why did we start looking at the program Bellevue was running and have interest in bringing it to Issaquah? As I mentioned, for us, we see this as a great opportunity to help meet our climate action targets. We'll be able to work with buildings on a faster track than what the law would require. And as I mentioned before, I think that work with existing buildings can be one of the harder areas to tackle. If we start this program now, we also allow our buildings to take advantage of the available incentive dollars before they run out. We're also seeing from Bellevue that buildings that are going through this process are with a hand in hand with a service provider. They're tending to exceed the efficiency standards by an average of about 15%. And there's also an opportunity for the city's partner service provider to work with buildings on decarbonization or on electrification pathway if that's of interest to the building owner. So ability to go above and beyond those state standards. And also by running this program, we would be able to reach out to buildings that aren't yet required or may never be required to meet these standards. So we can go beyond those that are required under state law to come into compliance. As I mentioned, there was an amendment passed this last legislative session for the 20,000 square foot or greater buildings and multifamily. I think we're probably going to see a lot of interest from those building owners in the next couple of years as the rulemaking is complete and those standards are set. So starting this program now allows us to get a bit ahead of that and then be able to expand the service in the future. And then I think finally, there's an opportunity here to really partner with our businesses and building owners. We set very bold actions in our climate plan, and we can show them that the city really wants to be a partner in helping them help us to achieve those targets and for the benefit of the whole community. So the feedback I'm looking for tonight is there has been some interest expressed that maybe the city should require some kind of above and beyond requirements for participation in this program and for the city to be able to offer this service. And I had a couple of ideas about what those above and beyond requirements could be in the memo. I can go through those in a minute. But I wanted to note a few things here, not to get ahead of the discussion, but just a few things I did want to point out as we go into that discussion. As I mentioned, McDonald Miller with the Bellevue program is finding that the buildings they're working with tend to, on average, exceed the requirements by at least 15%, some as high as 30%. And they've also been working on other opportunities for those buildings to reduce fossil fuel use. They've also shared that in some cases, it's cheaper for buildings not to come into compliance. So that's just something that and instead to pay the penalty. So that's just something we should consider if we do want to have additional requirements for participation in this program. We want to make sure we're not creating more barriers that would make it even harder to partner with these buildings. And then lastly, I really do see one of the opportunities of this program is to show that the city wants to partner with buildings to support them in meeting our greenhouse gas emission targets. So again, just thinking about if we do want to include any above and beyond in this program, that we're taking that into consideration as well, and not creating more hurdles for our business community to comply. So with that, I did want to hear from the board, though, if you do think that if the city's offering this service, should we be considering any kind of additional requirements above the state compliance for participation? And if so, what might those look like? Or any other feedback that you all have on this proposal prior to coming to council?
Thanks, Stacy. While we wait for others, I just have a clarifying question on, it seems like outreach is one aspect of what we're going to be doing, which is going to be not specifically necessarily focused on, like that's just going to be general outreach. But it seems like the thing that would be more specific to a building is that if the city was to fund the scoping assessment, is that where you think the requirements would come in, is for like forming that aspect of it, or is it for the outreach portion as well?
The scoping assessment is, so the outreach and marketing, that would be to make sure that those that are required to come into compliance with the law or might be eligible for the incentive, there would be direct messaging going to them. We'd also do some broader messaging to talk to them about the requirements and the service that could be provided through this partnership. The scoping assessment then is where the service providers working one-on-one with the building owner to identify the specific projects that need to take place for them to get into compliance. Does that clarify or?
Yeah, that helps. Thanks.
Okay.
Anne, you have a comment.
To me, it seems like maybe the above and beyond is that they are doing it ahead of the time that they are required to do it. Just a thought. And I think it's a really super cool program, and it's going to help us out a lot on a lot of different levels. For one thing, it gets the building owners involved and really engaged in this. And so that's more people that are engaged in collaborating on the climate action plan. And it seems like a great way for Issaquah to reduce a bunch of emissions.
Thanks, Anne. Rishi, you have a comment?
Yeah, and first I had a quick clarifying question. So when it says like additional requirements for participants, does that mean potential building owners? And what kind?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that was the thought is if so buildings must comply with this law on a certain time period defined by the law. If the city's going to be offering a free service to the building and even paying for the assessments, energy assessments, should we be asking the buildings to do a little bit more than what they might be required under the law? That's the question. Some of the ideas that came up in conversations with partners was we could ask them to exceed the state energy efficiency requirements by a certain percent. We could have some requirements that they need to participate in certain kinds of trainings or workshops that might be on kind of the lighter end of the requirement. We could ask that they need to go above and beyond those energy efficiency requirements and actually map out or develop a pathway for decarbonization. So I think there's some other requirements that could come to play if we want to ask them to go above and beyond by taking advantage of this city service.
And would those additional requirements be like supported or funded by the city under the program itself?
Yeah, I think it would depend on what that was. So yeah, that's a great question. If it was a training or workshop, probably the city would put funding towards whoever our selected service provider was to run that training or workshop. So some of them may have an additional cost to the city. Yeah, that's a great question.
Okay, thanks. And then I had a general comment just about the idea here is I think it would probably be very beneficial if there was a section directed specifically towards schools because the school buildings themselves generally throughout the summer still continue to utilize energy, but do not necessarily have perhaps solar power or other means of maintaining a clean energy footprint for that building. So I think it would be interesting to see an ideal perhaps to have an additional incentive for schools or maybe an additional outreach towards schools.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and schools as well as municipal buildings are required to come into compliance with this law, but thinking about how could we have maybe a little bit different targeted program or maybe, yeah, like you were saying, like maybe there's a little bit more focus on solar or clean energy for schools and thinking a little bit more how to make that program unique. That's a great suggestion.
Thank you, Rishi. I had some comments on this one. One of the things I just would be, it's sort of a question, but kind of not, is I would guess that any of these changes that business owners are having to make are on the order of six-figure, like very large numbers that we're talking about. So I do think, while I would be the first one to say that I would love to see some above and beyond, I do think that the relative benefit they're receiving from participating in this relative to their potential costs of going above and beyond, I just think we need to factor that in and be realistic with what that cost benefit is going to be for for those building owners. The other piece that I think is actually really important for requirements is the service providers, because I think in some ways that you could look at that as being the ones that actually are receiving the benefit, because typically they would have to charge customers for that, and in this case they're not. So I would be a little bit concerned if it was a blank slate, any service provider that isn't aligned with what the goals of this program are. And so I do think that is an area that we might maybe need to have a little more focus. And I don't know if it needs to be a single provider like Bellevue, but it's also lead generation for them. Like there's a ton of value in this program to them, I would think. And so I think we need to think about how that could be leveraged to potentially even get better deals for Issaquah businesses. And then the last thing, let's see, did I have anything else? No, I think those were the main things. I do think that, oh, no, one other thing. So one area that I think we could, like in terms of requirements for building owners that would maybe be tied to funding of that scoping assessment is like how quick they are to act. So are they in a position to actually move on this and make actions, or are they just doing kind of throwing something out? And if they're not acting within a certain amount of time, does that mean they're no longer this scoping assessment is no longer funded by the city? That just seems like one way we could tie it to make sure that it's like committed people that are actually going to act on the part of the process that we're funding.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Can I just ask a clarification on your second point? Are you talking about when we get to this stage where I made the comment that the building owner wouldn't have to go with the city partner? Is that where you're saying if they choose their own service provider, we need to make sure that that provider, the improvements they're making are in line with this program? And
well, in my understanding, this might have been wrong, was that in a lot of cases, this is kind of a design build situation where the service provider that is designing and scoping the improvements needed, I would guess it's one of the ones that's also bidding on and trying to participate in the execution of improvements. That might be wrong, but that was my assumption. And that was what I was actually talking about earlier on in the process, who can actually be a part of these initial scoping phases and the scoping assessments themselves.
Okay.
But I might be misunderstanding what the process of how these things generally develop is.
Okay. No, I get that right.
Any other comments or questions for Stacy? Anne, you have another comment.
I like Jamie's idea of trying to get good deals for Issaquah businesses or building owners on the retrofitting and energy decreasing. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. I guess I'm not seeing any other comments, so I think to summarize, it sounds like there's general support for this program. I think some of the areas that, just figuring out what above and beyond might mean in this scenario. I don't think there was a couple ideas, but not general consensus on exactly what that looks like. I had mentioned the service provider thing, and I think I'm trying to think if there was any other comments. I think there was general support, given that it helped the city get more engaged with business owners and start to partner on helping to get these goals deployed in these buildings.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone for all of that feedback. I know we're rushing and going late, and I think I kind of committed to not having these board meetings go too late, but really appreciate that and having us squeeze in these two topics ahead of going to council. Really important feedback. So we'll be on the same track for presenting to council as the heat pump program. If all goes well and they're supportive, we hope to move to contracting this summer and get this program underway early in the fall.
Thank you, Stacy. I think with that, we will move on to reports.
All right, I have a number of reports. I will try and move quickly as I know we're late. So first one is just a follow-up. This may have come up even back at our January meeting, but there was interest by the board expressed in wildlife corridor studies. So I just wanted to let folks know that there have been conversations happening within the city, both with parks and then with our planning department. We've even been having some conversations with consultants that do these types of studies around the state. We're looking at now just with all that is going on, both in parks and with Title 18, that we're likely going to be putting forward a budget request for our next budget cycle to move forward with a wildlife corridor study probably next year. I think there's a lot more conversation needed around what would the goals of that study be, what's the need, how would it be implemented. So we will plan to come back to you all and probably talk with some of the other boards and commissions just to vet some of those goals and get some ideas around that. But just wanted to circle back on that one because it has gotten some traction, but probably won't take place for at least another 6 months or so, just given all that's happening with the city. Another update that was requested at the last meeting was the update on the Recology contract or the waste hauler contract, which is now the Recology contract. So there was a presentation on Monday to council, and they did approve to authorize the mayor to move forward with that contract. So just wanted to do a very brief summary of the timeline for that, and how we got here, and then some of those elements that were included in the contract. So back in late April, staff presented to a city council study session on the draft contract. There was information requested from staff to go back and negotiate with the potential hauler, and then more information was presented to the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee meeting. That committee eventually concurred with staff recommendations, and then the contract was brought to council just on Monday for approval. So a few highlights of the new contract, and I watched part of that video earlier today. I can send the video from the council meeting if folks are interested in that presentation. But a few highlights that staff were able to negotiate a number of changes from the original proposal from Recology. One was moving forward with one electric collection truck this year. And then Recology is committed to having all support vehicles be electric by the start of their next contract, which is next summer. They are also going to advance the phase-in of electric hauler trucks with 2 trucks in 2025, and then planning to move to fully electric by 2026. There'll be some planning that'll take place in the years earlier to develop that pathway to a full electric fleet by 2026. Also, what I think is really exciting is they will be committing a full-time staff, a waste zero specialist just for Issaquah, which will be a great opportunity to work with them, especially as Dale was presenting those waste diversion rates that are not trending in the right direction right now. They'll also be doing inspections of containers. There'll be more outreach, tracking, reporting, more targeted work with multifamily and commercial customers that have the ones that have the lower diversion rates. They'll be maintaining the store. And then something that's come up since the presentation to the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee is we've been having a lot more conversations about wildlife proofing, wildlife challenges. I know in my neighborhood, the bears are through like clockwork the night before garbage collection and the day of garbage collection. So we're starting to talk about some options outside of the contracting process that we might look at for bear proofing. And if you do go back and watch the video from Monday, Councilmember Hunt did speak to this, but possibly identifying some key wildlife areas where we might want to require, or possibly the city would supplement costs for bear cans. So more conversation to come on that, but it's definitely a topic that we'll be continuing to discuss and working to address. A couple more quick updates. The memo summarizing the board's comments on the Transportation Improvement Program did get submitted for the public hearing and council review. I believe that was also on Monday. I had a meeting with Deputy Council President Hall a week or two ago, and he did want to acknowledge that there are a few members of the council that regularly watch the environmental board meetings and are tracking what you all are saying. But they have really appreciated the memos as well, summarizing those conversations clearly and succinctly so that they can take that into consideration for their deliberations. And then included in the meeting packet was the updated meeting calendar. As I noted, we had to shift some items around just because of timing of reports or plans being ready. So do just take a look at some of the changes to that calendar. And then also finally wanted to flag the email from Candy Lorenzo on the deconstructing bias training. They are asking all board and commission members to sign up for one of those training dates. And feel free to reach out with any questions on that. That was a lot. Thank you, Jamie. That's all I have tonight.
Thank you, Stacy. Any other business or announcements? All right, hearing none. Thanks everyone for sticking around a bit later. And with that, we're adjourned. Have a good night.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.